My name is Dina, and I have been washing the sins of white folks out of their clothes for 26 years. They call me a laundress. I call myself a reader of fabric, a listener to seams. I can tell where someone walked by the grit dried into a hem and what someone did by the color that refuses to rinse out. Lie has carved little rivers across my palms. The kettles have bent my back into a question mark. Still I stand at the tubs each day because water tells the truth to anyone patient enough to listen for it. Steam rises, and the shed becomes a kind of chapel where the cloth confesses without words. Whitfield Plantation rolls out like a pale sea, 3,000 acres of cotton and dust that make prayer taste like lint. 230 souls are counted beside the mules. I am one of them, bought and tallied, yet the laundry shed is my small kingdom of soap and starch and steam. Inside those plank walls I decide what is filthy, what can be saved, and what is stained in ways only God can weigh. Shirts arrive whispering of struggle, aprons complain of grease and hurry, coats gossip about rain and road. Blood, though blood does not whisper, blood argues. It says, "This happened," even when a face smiles and swears nothing did. I learned that argument at 16 when a sleeve turned the basin pink and kept turning it pink no matter how I scrubbed. Since then I keep my eyes open and my mouth mostly shut. A woman lives longer that way. Still, there are seasons when the cloths will not be quiet, when the steam hangs heavy and stories push up through the foam like bones through thin soil. That is when he rides the oak-lined road. Father Michael Sullivan, cassock like a shadow, hair gone silver, eyes blue as cold well water. He sits a black gelding straight as a nail and smiles like kindness is something he invented and carries in his pocket. He preaches patience to people taught to swallow their screams. He praises meekness as if it were a gate to heaven and not a lock on a door. Then, while the hymns are still warm in our mouths, he offers private counsel to the youngest girls. On the first Monday after his visits, a bundle reaches my table. His vestments, his collar, his underthings, all the soft pieces that touch a man where his prayers are supposed to live. I wash what is brought. I lower my gaze. Still the garments speak. They tell on him in the language I know best, the only courtroom open to a woman like me. Sometimes the seams show a snap like teeth bared. Sometimes a dark half-moon will lighten under lie but never release. Sometimes, beneath incense and candle wax, there is another smell so blunt the air goes hard inside my shed. You can fling more soap at it until your skin burns raw. It will not lie. Cloth tells what silence hides. I fold each robe with care and send it back, but I hold the memory of what the water said. And month by month the pattern lays itself out the way a quilt grows from pieces blue cotton. Here, a tear there, a stubborn crescent where a struggle left its bite. People love a miracle. They want a voice from the clouds and a villain struck where he stands. That is not how this world runs. Justice, when it comes, ties on an apron. It arrives on feet made of habit and hands trained by work. I do not carry a sword or papers with my name set free upon them. I have a tub, a jug, and arms made strong by wringing sheets. I have eyes that can read the language of stains. I have a memory that does not let go, and I have a daughter whose name is Grace, whose laughter used to skip like stones and now falls flat some days, as if the river refuses to carry it. Years of washing teach a rhythm. Haul, soap, beat, rinse, wring, hang. They also teach patience. A stain can be stubborn. It can take many boilings before it surrenders. A lie is like that. It can wear a collar and a smile and still be nothing but dirt the water has not touched yet. Girls go to confession and return older than their years. A blue dress tears at the shoulder. Hands that once flew now fold like wings after a storm. The cloth speaks, and though my tongue stays still, my heart learns each word until the meaning is a weight I cannot set down. Do not mistake me for a woman drunk on rage. Rage flares and eats its own fuel. Purpose is steadier. Purpose is a coal banked under ash, waiting for the right breath. On the morning the world calls Easter, my purpose will glow hot enough to light a room. The water will be ready. The door will be closed. And the man who told us meekness would save our souls will learn what water says when a woman who knows its weight decides a head must stay beneath it. I have measured the distance from the door to the tub. I have counted the steps and the breaths and the seconds it takes for thrashing to slow. Afterward there will be whispers. Accident, they will say. God's will, slippery floor. They will gather by the river and ask where Father Sullivan has gone. Some will cry. Some will fold their hands and speak his name as if it were a blessing and not a blade. None of them will have heard what I have heard in linen month after month. None will have seen the pale salt that dries where a body's secrets try to hide, the stubborn crescent that clings where a struggle left its bite. They will not know the ledger I carry, the faces behind each mark, Sarah, Mercy, all the unnamed before them, and the one I love best. Hear me plain. I wash more than clothes. I wash stories. I wash lies. And when a lie is woven into a man's very garments, when it clings like grease to the weave of him, sometimes washing means making sure he cannot put those garments on again. I do not pretend this is pretty work. I do not pretend my hands are clean in any book but my own. I only say I know water, and I know sin, and I know what both can carry away if given the chance. My shed is no courthouse, but it holds a bench and a basin, and sometimes that is enough. My story begins with steam on my face, ache in my spine, a set of vestments on my table that will not stop speaking. It begins with a basin filled to the brim and a woman counting breaths. It begins with a key tucked where I can reach it, a jug standing like a witness, and Easter rising pink over Georgia. It begins with my daughter's name whispered over suds, and another name spoken like a curse. It begins in silence, because water does its best work without noise, and it will end when the water speaks for me. There is a key where I can reach it, a jug that waits like a witness, and Easter rising over Georgia. The basin is full, the breath is counted, and water is ready to speak. The Whitfield Plantation sits heavy on the Georgia earth like a crown made of bone and sorrow. From the ridge above the river, you can see its white columns gleaming through the haze, proud and cold against fields that roll for miles. Cotton stretches out in every direction, endless and pale, a sea of suffering disguised as profit. 230 souls labor to keep it alive. Men, women, children, all owned by Master James Whitfield, whose voice carries farther than mercy and whose temper can sour the air itself. He counts us as numbers, as hands, as property, but within the fenced corners of this place, we each find small territories of our own. Mine is the laundry shed. It isn't much to look at just planks nailed together, smoke curling through a crooked chimney, and the constant hiss of boiling water. But it is mine, the only space where my word is law. I have ruled here for 26 years, surrounded by the smells of lye, soap, and starch. The air always tastes faintly of salt and heat. My hands are my tools, scarred, cracked, and strong. They've shaped my kingdom one washboard stroke at a time. Every morning before dawn, I start the fires beneath the iron kettles. Flames lick the blackened bottoms as I pour in buckets of well water, watching steam rise like spirits from the past. By the time the first rays of sun slide across the fields, the water is already trembling with the promise of another day's labor. This shed is more than a workshop. It's a confessional of sorts, though not the kind built with carved wood and velvet curtains. The clothes that pass through my hands speak louder than any preacher's sermon. They tell on their owners without hesitation, whispering of passion, violence, fear, and deceit. The stains are my scripture. I have learned to read them the way others read the Bible. Mud means travel. Sweat means work. Blood means truth. Some days, I think God speaks more clearly through linen than through the lips of men. The Whitfield family sends down their garments by the cartload, shirts, petticoats, tablecloths, uniforms, all smelling of perfume and pride. The house slaves deliver them in silence, careful not to draw the mistress's eye or the master's anger. Each piece of cloth carries a fragment of the world I will never freely walk through. I handle them all, turning fine silk inside out, scrubbing the collars that press against throats that call me girl. Their stains don't shock me anymore. I've seen too much. Sweat from drunken dinners, wine spilled in rage, blood from a beating disguised as punishment. The fabric never lies. When I was 16, I thought laundry was just water and soap. Now, at 42, I know it is truth and memory. Water remembers. It holds the echoes of what it touches, carries them into the steam, and leaves them clinging to your skin. The longer you work with it, the more it teaches you if you're willing to listen. I have spent my life listening. Most days follow a rhythm older than me. The field hands rise with the sun, the overseer's whip cracks, and the air fills with the rustle of cotton bags. The big house stirs later, when the mistress rings for her breakfast. By mid-morning, the shed is alive. The kettles boil, the washboards scrape, and the ropes overhead sag under the weight of drying linens. My helpers, 2 younger women, Ella and Ruth, move in silence beside me. They have learned the language of water too, though they do not yet know how to read its deeper messages. I teach them slowly, not with words, but with the tilt of a bucket, the touch of fabric, the patience to notice. Look here, I'll say, pointing to a tear shaped like a crescent. That wasn't an accident. Something pulled too hard. They nod, absorbing the unspoken. On Sundays, the rhythm changes. The plantation puts on its disguise of holiness. Slaves are herded to the small chapel near the oak grove, built by Master Whitfield himself as proof of his Christian generosity. He calls it saving souls. We call it another way to remind us who owns them. The preacher for these gatherings is Father Michael Sullivan, a man who rides in from town once a month. His horse is black as tar, his cassock spotless, and his smile polished to a saint's shine. The white folks speak of him with reverence. A man of God, they say, a shepherd for the colored flock. I once thought that might be true. I do not think so anymore. From the doorway of my shed, I've watched him dismount, calm, confident, sure of his power. The girls whisper about him in the evenings. They say his eyes are kind, his voice soft. They believe him when he tells them that obedience brings reward in heaven. They kneel before him, confessing sins they barely understand, and return with eyes that will not meet mine. Something inside them changes. Their laughter dulls, their steps slow. The joy that once flitted around them like sunlight on water fades into shadow. I notice because I have been trained to notice. The laundry tells me everything. After each of his visits, a bundle arrives from the big house. Father Sullivan's vestments, folded neatly inside a white cloth. I wash them with care, as instructed. Huzzah, the man of the cloth, the mistress reminds me. Treat his garments with respect. I do. I wash them the way I wash everything else, with precision, with patience, with my eyes open. The first time, I noticed a faint scent beneath the incense. The second time, a thread of red along the hem of his undergarment. The third time, a tear no wider than a finger. By the fourth, I had stopped counting. Still, no one speaks. The chapel remains full each month. The slaves sing hymns about mercy while the priest bows his head and whispers blessings that curdle in the air. The master beams with pride at his own piety. The mistress praises Father Sullivan's devotion. The children stare wide-eyed at his silver hair and gentle voice. And I stand at the back, hands rough with lie, knowing the truth that none of them dare to see. My kingdom of soap and steam might seem small, but it has given me sight. While others pray for deliverance, I see the pattern forming in stains. The world outside may be ruled by men, but the shed is ruled by evidence, and the evidence speaks. Every robe I scrub, every collar I press, every whisper of cloth between my fingers tightens a thread that will one day pull loose the fabric of lies woven around this place. In that shed, I have seen pieces of every kind of sin: pride, cruelty, lust, deceit. But the worst sins are the ones dressed in holiness. A thief may steal your coins, a master your freedom, but a false priest steals your soul and calls it salvation. I have learned that nothing rots faster than righteousness left too long unwashed. Sometimes, when the moon climbs and the shed goes quiet, I stay behind. I light one candle and let the shadows stretch long across the floor. The smell of soap softens, replaced by smoke and night air. I close my eyes and listen to the walls. They creak like tired bones, but keep their secrets well. I whisper to them, the way a woman whispers to water, "One day, I'll wash more than linen." The flame flickers, and the air trembles, as if the world itself hears my vow. The Whitfield Plantation sleeps, believing itself eternal, its order unbreakable. But in the shed behind the smokehouse, justice is already learning to breathe. The first time I saw Sarah after her confession with Father Sullivan, she moved like a woman 3 times her age. Sarah was just 15, small, clever, and quick, with a smile that used to outshine the Sunday. She worked in the big house, polishing silver and serving tea with hands so careful that the mistress often bragged she was nearly civilized. But that Sunday, after confession, Sarah's eyes were hollow. She would not meet mine when she brought down the father's vestments for washing. Her hands trembled when she passed me the bundle, and when I asked what troubled her, she just said, "God chose me for a blessing." Her voice cracked on the word blessing, as though it burned her throat. That night, she wept in her cot, silent sobs muffled by her pillow. 2 weeks later, Master Whitfield sold her to a plantation in Alabama. "She's grown difficult," he said, "unfit for housework." I heard his words and understood their shape. I knew she had become a problem only because she knew too much. The laundry told me as much. When I unwrapped Father Sullivan's garments after that visit, there was a smear on the collar, faint but unmistakable, a mark that soap could not quite erase. Beneath the scent of incense lay something else, something human and shameful. After Sarah was gone, It happened again. Different girls, same story. They went into that chapel soft with faith and came out brittle, afraid to be touched, afraid to laugh. Each month I waited for the bundle of laundry to arrive, and each month it did. His undergarments, his white collar, his cassock, all bearing new evidence of old sin. Sometimes there were tears in the seams, small and desperate, the kind that happen when fabric is yanked in a struggle. Sometimes a drop of dried blood, too low, too hidden to be innocent. I washed, but the water spoke louder than forgiveness. I started to count, not the way you count coins, but the way a mourner counts the steps to a grave. Sarah was the first. Then came Mercy, then Ruthie, then a girl named Ellen whose laughter vanished overnight. 5, then 7, then 9. Some disappeared, sold away to hide shame. Some stayed and carried silence like a scar. Each one had the same look, haunted, guilty for sins that were not theirs. I remember the day I found the blue cotton scrap tangled in the father's cassock buttons. It was small, no bigger than a thumb, but it might as well have been a scream. I recognized the weave instantly. I had sewn that dress myself for little Mercy, who had begged me for something pretty to wear to her first confession. I could see her in it, bright eyes, ribbon in her hair, the blue of the dress making her skin glow warm like honey. When she came back from the chapel that day, she wouldn't look up from the floor. The sleeve was torn, and she said she'd caught it on a nail. A lie, gentle and rehearsed, the kind of lie taught by fear. When I found that torn scrap in the father's clothes, I didn't need any sermon to tell me what it meant. That night, I sat in the dim light of my cabin with the blue cloth in my lap. I turned it over and over between my fingers, feeling its softness, the tiny stitch I'd sewn crooked near the hem. Rage built in me slow as thunder. My hands, cracked from years of washing, shook until the cloth fell to the floor. I picked it up and folded it carefully, placing it in the wooden box where I keep the few things that still belong to me: an old comb, a ribbon from my mother, a Bible page with no cover. The blue scrap joined them, my secret evidence. The next morning, I looked at Father Sullivan differently. He stood before the congregation, shining like grace itself, his silver hair gleaming in the morning light. He preached about obedience and meekness, about the beauty of silent suffering. His voice was smooth as butter melting over poison. I watched the way the girls stared at him, heads tilted, eyes wide. They believed him, the way the thirsty believe in rain, and I hated him for it. I told myself then that God must see, that he would not allow a man like that to hide forever behind holy words. But the months passed, and nothing changed. Sarah was gone. Mercy stopped smiling. Ruthie flinched whenever she heard a man's footsteps. The world stayed the same, cruel, blind, indifferent. And I began to wonder if maybe God was tired, or deaf, or simply unwilling to dirty his hands where the likes of us were concerned. So I started to pay closer attention. I noted the timing of the father's visits, his routines, the way he lingered after services. I learned who he called into confession first and who he saved for last. I saw that he always smiled too long at the youngest, the ones just starting to turn from girls into women. I saw fear sprout in their eyes before they even knew its name. Once, I caught sight of him leaving the chapel after dark. His collar loosened, his hands trembling slightly as he wiped at his mouth with a cloth. The moonlight caught his face, and for the first time I saw something there, a flicker of guilt, or maybe satisfaction. It was gone too fast to read. He glanced toward the laundry shed and then turned away, as though the sight of soap and water made him nervous. Maybe he sensed that I could see what others refused to see. By then, I had stopped praying for God to act. I began to think that maybe he had already done his part when he gave me eyes and hands strong enough to do the work myself. The thought frightened me, but it also steadied me. It gave shape to the anger that had been gnawing at my bones. There were days I thought about speaking to Master Whitfield, telling him what the father had done. But what proof could a slave or woman offer against a man in holy robes? A priest's word against mine would be no contest. Even the whisper of accusation would bring the whip or worse. The blue cloth in my box might as well have been invisible, so I held my tongue and waited. The pattern was clear now. Every month brought a new victim, a new bundle, a new stain that refused to fade. The shed became my confessional, my crime scene, my court of judgment. I washed and listened and remembered. The water boiled and steamed. The stains lifted, the truth remained. I began to dream of water differently, not the gentle kind that cleanses, but the deep kind that swallows. I dreamed of the river, dark and wide, with the priest's reflection trembling on its surface. In those dreams, the water rose up and claimed him, dragging him down, washing away the lies and leaving the world clean for the first time in years. I would wake with my hands aching, as though I had been gripping something heavy in my sleep. Some nights, I'd sit outside my cabin, watching the fireflies drift across the fields. I'd think of Sarah and Mercy and all the others who'd lost their light. Their laughter used to fill the quarters after work, sweet and reckless. Now the air was quiet, like the plantation itself was holding its breath. Every month, the same horse hooves echoed down the Oak Road, and every month I prayed not for salvation but for courage. By the time summer bled into autumn, I no longer needed water to tell me the truth. The truth had burned itself into my heart. The pattern was complete. The only thing left was to decide what to do with it, and deep down, I already knew the answer. The laundry shed had become my confessional long before I realized it was also my evidence room. Every secret I discovered there clung to me like the scent of lie that never left my skin. But once I found that blue cloth tangled in Father Sullivan's cassock, I stopped pretending that silence was safety. I began to study his garments like a detective studies a map, tracing the roots of sin he thought were invisible. Each button, each thread, each tear told a story only my eyes were trained to read. The cassocks were always black, heavy with the heat of Georgia and the weight of false holiness. The undergarments were fine linen, far softer than anything the slaves wore. The white collar, though crisp, starched, and shining, was the greatest lie of them all. It looked pure, but every month it came to me marked by stains that no scrubbing could erase. The morning after his visits, I would unwrap the bundle on my table like a prayer gone wrong. The smell of incense lingered, mixed with candle wax and the faint metallic tang of something darker. I'd hold the fabric under my nose, and the scent of him would crawl through the air: sweat, fear, lust, guilt. The first time I nearly gagged. After that I just grew cold. Each month I found more signs: a thread pulled loose where it shouldn't be, blood near the hem where no blade had been, fibers stretched thin as if from desperate fingers gripping them. Every discovery turned my work into ritual wash. Observe, remember. I handled the garments with the same care a priest handles the host, because what I held was sacred in its own way. The truth. It's strange how lies and fabric share the same nature. Both can cover what's ugly, both can fray under pressure, and both reveal everything when soaked in water. I think sometimes God chooses strange messengers, and maybe that's why he gave the truth to a laundress. No one else on Whitfield Plantation could see it. To them, Father Sullivan was light and salvation, the man who promised the meek their heavenly inheritance. To me, he was a shadow cast across every girl's future. One afternoon, as I pressed his freshly washed robe, I noticed a shimmer where the sunlight hit it, a faint pink streak across the sleeve. I stopped, staring, feeling my heart slow. That stain was not from wine or fruit. It was blood, thin and watery, spread by a trembling hand. I leaned closer and smelled the faint sourness beneath the starch. My hands trembled. "You can hide it from them," I whispered, "but not from me." I pressed harder, watching steam rise from the iron like smoke from a sacrifice. I began saving the smallest things: a frayed button, a piece of thread, a single hair caught in a seam. Each was a fragment of proof that a holy man could be foul inside. I hid them beneath the floorboard near the stove, where no one else would ever look. I told myself it was just to remind me, but the truth is, I wanted evidence. If one day my words were questioned, I would not stand empty-handed before God or man. At night, I replayed what the garments told me. The pattern was always the same. He came, he preached, he confessed, he sinned, then he left his filth for me to wash away. The world believed he was cleansing others' souls, but I knew he was dirtying his own. I started to imagine his face underwater, his lips moving in prayer as bubbles rose like false promises. I didn't yet know what I would do, only that something had to change. One Sunday, as he preached, I stood in the back of the chapel, half in shadow, the smell of soap still clinging to my dress. His sermon was about purity. His voice, soft and musical, filled the room. "The Lord sees all," he said. "He knows our weakness, yet still forgives." I looked at the young girls sitting near the front, their eyes wide, their small hands folded in devotion. My stomach twisted. They were lambs being led to confession, and I could already see the wolf's shadow fall across them. His words about forgiveness made me furious, because I knew he had none to give. After service, he approached me in the yard. "Sister Dena," he said, smiling kindly, "I hope my sermon gave you comfort." His eyes were blue, the color of a cloudless sky, a sky that offers no shade, no mercy. "It did, Father," I replied, keeping my face still. It reminded me that the Lord sees everything. Something flickered in his expression then, something that almost looked like fear. It vanished quickly, replaced by a practiced smile. "Indeed he does," he said softly, "and we must all be humble before his gaze." He tipped his hat and walked away, his cassock brushing the dust, leaving small crosses in his wake. That night I dreamt of washing his clothes again, only this time the water turned red. No matter how I scrubbed, the stains spread wider until the whole tub was filled with crimson foam. When I woke, my hands were clenched so tightly that the nails had drawn blood. The dream left a thought behind, clear and sharp. Some stains should not be washed out, they should be drowned. From that moment, my work changed. I no longer cleaned just to please the mistress or earn favor. I cleaned to prepare myself. Each garment I washed became a lesson in patience, each fold a rehearsal for judgment. The shed was no longer just my kingdom, it was my court. Every robe that passed through it was a testimony, and I was both witness and executioner waiting for the right day to act. In late winter of 1856, I began keeping track of the church calendar. Easter was approaching, the day of cleansing, resurrection, and renewal. It seemed fitting. The Father would speak of water washing away sin, and I would see to it that the words finally became true. I didn't yet know how, but I could feel something moving inside me, a rhythm like the steady beat of a wash tub, a pulse that said, justice. I noticed more changes in him too. He grew nervous when he spoke to me, glancing away quickly, his smile tighter. Perhaps he sensed that his secrets were no longer safe. Once, when he handed me his vestments, our fingers brushed. His skin was cold and clammy. He withdrew as if burned. "Be careful, Dena," he murmured. "Too much heat ruins the cloth." I looked up, meeting his gaze. "Sometimes heat is what it takes to make something truly clean," I said. The words hung between us, heavy and sharp. He gave a short, uneasy laugh and left. That night, I went to my box and unfolded the blue cloth again. It had faded slightly, but its meaning had not. It was my reminder, my spark. I pressed it to my lips like a prayer, but my prayer wasn't for forgiveness. It was for strength. I whispered the names Sarah, Mercy, Ruthie, and promised them that one day he would not come back from his sermon. From that day forward, I watched him not as a servant, but as a hunter studies his prey. I learned the weight of his footsteps, the way he moved his hands when nervous, the small hitch in his breath after telling a lie. I became invisible to him, just the laundress, the background, the hands that kept him looking holy. He never realized that the woman washing his sins was already planning his drowning. Grace has always been the one thing that keeps me breathing when the world tries to choke me. My daughter, my heart, my reason for still getting up before dawn when my bones scream for rest. She is 14 now, tall, bright-eyed, and far too beautiful for her own safety. Her skin carries the same warm tone as mine, and her smile can turn the hardest day soft. But beauty in a slave girl is a dangerous thing. It draws eyes that see ownership, not innocence. I have taught her all my life how to move quietly, how to bow her head just enough to keep out of trouble, how to say, "Yes, sir," and "No, ma'am," without letting the words break her spirit. I thought I had prepared her for every cruelty this world could offer. I was wrong. It happened on a Thursday evening in late March. The air was thick with the smell of rain and blooming magnolia. I was stirring our supper when I heard her footsteps pounding toward the cabin. When the door burst open, I saw her face streaked with tears, her sleeve torn at the shoulder. She stumbled into my arms, shaking like a bird caught in a storm. "Mama!" she gasped. Something bad happened. Her voice was small, a child's voice again. My spoon clattered to the floor, and I pulled her close, feeling her heart hammer against mine. "Tell me, baby," I whispered, though a cold dread already gripped me. It took time for the words to come. They came in pieces, broken by sobs and silences. Father Sullivan had called her after the evening prayers, saying he needed to speak with her privately about her spiritual growth. He said she was becoming a young woman, and that the devil preyed on young women most. He told her that purity needed tending, that he must guide her before sin could take root. She trusted him. Everyone did. She followed him to the small room behind the chapel, the same room where I had collected his laundry 100 times. When she said that, something inside me turned to ice. I could see it, the cramped space, the smell of wax and dust, the locked door. I knew how thick those walls were. I knew what kind of secrets they kept. Grace's voice trembled as she told me what he said next, how he spoke about temptation, how he told her that sometimes the body must be examined for signs of sin. My baby tried to believe he meant well. She said she wanted to make God proud. Then his hands were on her. I held her tighter as she cried. Every word tore at me. He said he had to make sure I was pure, Mama, she whispered. He told me to take off my dress. He said it was holy. I felt my stomach twist until I thought I might vomit. My heart was a drum of rage in my chest. Did he? I couldn't finish. She shook her head. He tried, she said, but I fought him. I scratched his face. I bit his hand. Her voice broke again. He said I was possessed by demons, that he'd pray for my soul and try again next month. Next month. The words rang like a death sentence. The priest planned to come back, to finish what he started. I pulled away just enough to look into her eyes. You listen to me, I said, steady and low. What that man did to you was evil. You didn't do anything wrong. He is the one who's dirty, not you. She looked confused, almost angry. But he's a priest, she said. He speaks for God. I cupped her face in my hands. No, baby. Some men use God's name to hide the devil's work. That man don't speak for God. He speaks for himself. Her tears slowed and she stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. What are we going to do, Mama? He said he'd tell Master Whitfield that I was causing trouble if I told anyone. He said I'd be sold away from you. I felt her fear sharp, raw, desperate, but beneath it, something else began to burn. It started small, like a spark in dry grass, but it spread fast, filling me until it was all I could feel. He won't hurt you again, I said quietly. My voice surprised me. It wasn't shaking anymore. It was hard, final. He won't hurt anybody again. She blinked up at me. How can you stop him? He's white. He's a priest. I looked toward the window, where the last light of evening was fading into red. I've spent my life washing other people's filth, I said. Maybe it's time I washed this place clean. She didn't understand, not yet, but she trusted me. That trust felt heavy in my chest, like a promise I couldn't break. That night, after Grace cried herself to sleep in my arms, I sat by the dying fire and planned. The world had given me only water and soap, but I would turn them into justice. I thought of every girl who had come to me broken, every garment that had whispered their pain. I thought of Sarah, of Mercy, and now of Grace. My hands ached from years of scrubbing, but they still had strength. I could end this. I would. I decided it would happen on Easter morning, when Father Sullivan returned for his grand baptism ceremony. It would be poetic, fitting. He would meet his judgment in the same water he used to hide his sins. I would use the symbols he had twisted holy water, baptism, cleansing, and turn them into his punishment. God had been silent long enough. It was time for his work to be done by mortal hands. The next day, I went about my duties as usual, keeping my face calm, my voice steady. I scrubbed the sheets, tended the fire, smiled when the mistress passed. No one noticed the difference. Only inside did something shift, a stillness, a clarity. When the moment came, I would be ready. Over the next 2 weeks, I began preparing quietly. I learned that the father would arrive the evening before Easter and stay in the guest quarters near the big house. I watched where he walked, where he prayed, how he moved. I practiced keeping my expression neutral, so no trace of hatred showed. The overseers saw only a laundress, same as always. Grace, meanwhile, stayed close to me. She spoke little, but I could feel the trust between us growing stronger. Sometimes she'd wake from a nightmare, trembling, and I'd hold her until she settled. It's almost over, I'd whisper, even though she didn't know what I meant. One night, when the moon hung low and red, I took the blue cloth from my wooden box and held it over the firelight. The edges were frayed now, the color faded. It looked like the sky just before dawn. I pressed it to my lips and swore an oath not to God, not to any master, but to my own blood. You'll never touch her again, I whispered. You'll never touch any of them again. The flames danced, as if they understood. After that night, fear left me. In its place was a calm I'd never known. Every movement, every breath had purpose. My body moved like it had been waiting all its life for this task. I stopped praying for deliverance. I started praying for precision. When the others talked about Easter, they spoke of resurrection and hope. I kept silent. I knew Easter would bring a different kind of rising, a reckoning from beneath the surface of holy water. I could almost hear the splash in my dreams, the gurgle of justice bubbling up from the depths. By the time the first buds opened on the magnolia trees, my plan was set. The priest would face the same purity he'd mocked. The same water that washed away sins would drown the sinner. And when it was done, the world would call it an accident. Only I and God and maybe the river would know the truth. The plan took shape from the small things I had watched for years: the father's schedules, the hidden spare key, the way the chapel's stone font sat quiet near the altar. It is always the little habits that betray a man. The loose brick behind Master Whitfield's fireplace, wrapped in oilcloth to keep the metal dry. The candlesticks the mistress never dusted because she liked them to look old. The peg near the shed where the father left his cassock. I knew these places because I had cleaned them. I knew how to move through their rooms without being noticed. If justice was to be given, it would be by using what they trusted most against them. I took the jug first. It was the same ceramic vessel we used for carrying wash water. It could hold a weight and look ordinary. I carried it full across the yard until my arms burned, practicing every path I might have to take. I counted the paces from the laundry shed to the river, from the guest house to the chapel. I learned the sound of loose stones underfoot, the rhythm of the wind through the oak trees, and where a misstep would look like an accident. The fewer the surprises, the safer my plan. Stealing holy water would be the riskiest part. The font in the chapel held only enough for baptisms and blessings. It was a stone basin, and the father kept it filled. The chapel was locked when not in use, and Master Whitfield kept the spare key hidden in his study behind a loose brick. I had dusted that study 100 times and knew the exact place he kept the key. It lay wrapped in oilcloth where only the house would think to look safe by their rules, obvious to those who worked their rooms. On a night when the moon hid itself and the plantation slept, I slipped from our cabin and moved like smoke toward the big house. Grace lay sleeping, and I checked the thin walls to be sure no one stirred. I crept to the study, eased the brick free, and took the key. My hands shook at first, but the metal was familiar under my fingertips, cold and small like a promise. I wrapped it in my handkerchief and left as quietly as I came, slipping past the shadowed hedges until I was back in the safety of my shed. The chapel door opened to me as if welcoming a proper conscience. The font stood near the altar, water still from the father's last blessing. I dipped my finger in to taste it. The water itself was ordinary, but its blessing came from a man who had abused it. I filled the jug carefully, reverently even, because if I had to do this wrong, then I wanted it to be done with intention. I covered the jug with linen and placed it among the things no one would touch. Then I turned the shed itself into a stage. I moved the big wooden tub to the center of the floor and filled it with well water. I arranged towels and robes to look as if I had simply prepared a private place for a priest to change. I wanted every angle, every detail, to speak of care, not malice. When he walked in, he must see only what he expected, a woman who knew her place and turned it into service. The more natural the scene, the less suspicion there would be. Mrs. Whitfield helped me without knowing. I mentioned that perhaps Father Sullivan might prefer a private place to change his cassock to avoid getting his traveling clothes wet. "How thoughtful of you, Dena," she said, patting my arm with that sweet cruelty. Her approval helped my plan more than she could know. White comfort and condescension are excellent disguises for what the powerless hide. I studied the father's habits as closely as I read fabric. He arrived Saturday night, stayed in the guest room, attended the service Sunday, and lingered for private confessions. He tended to change in the shed or near the river when baptisms happened. I planned for him to seek the shed for privacy. I practiced the motions I would need, moving the jug, steadying it beneath linen, keeping my hands ready to act. I timed his steps in my head so that when the moment came I would know the length of a breath, the interval of panic, the time it takes for thrashing to slow. Practicalities matter when you are planning something no one would expect of a laundress. I checked the route the overseers would take, the times the hired hands made their rounds, and where a shout might be muffled by distance. I practiced dragging the heavy tub a little, imagining the sound of a body slipping to the stone if a struggle happened. I prepared ways to make his drowning look accidental, a puddle on the stone, a slip, a fall. I wanted no blood, no marks, only the old story of misfortune to settle like dust on the truth. There were nights I feared the price of this choice. I imagined Grace dragged away, the mistress's face twisted with fury, Master Whitfield's cold satisfaction at proving his power. I thought of chains and the auction block. I thought of the lash. The thought curdled in my stomach. But then I folded the tiny blue scrap in my hands and remembered Mercy's face, Sarah's hollow eyes, the girls whose laughter had been stripped from them. Fear could not hold me. Fear could not unmake what had been done to them. So I kept my mouth shut. A plan spoken becomes a rumor and loses its edge. I held the secret tight, like heat in a fist. I moved through my days neutral-faced, smiling when the mistress passed. I taught Grace to hide the tremor in her hands behind a chore. I left the jug where it lay under the linen and checked it at night to be sure it was heavy and cold in its hiding place. On the last night before Easter, I sat with the jug between my knees and listened to the fields breathe. I prayed not for God's forgiveness, for precision. I whispered names into the dark. Mercy, Sarah, Ruthie, the children who could not say what had been done to them. I promised them something a church had not: action. The jug cool against my skin felt like a heart beating in my hands. Dawn would come. People would gather expecting rebirth and hymns. They would not expect a laundress to turn the tools of cleansing into instruments of judgment. The tub was full. The jug was waiting. The stage was set. I had taken the holy water and made it ready for a different kind of baptism, one that would wash away a predator and leave the children clean to live again. Easter morning came bright and precise, the sky a hard blue that made the white of Sunday clothes look almost insolent. People moved toward the river in a line of hymns and good manners, trusting the pictures they had been raised on. I worked at the shed as if nothing were different, stoking the kettles, laying towels, making the tub ready, each motion measured, each breath counted. My hands knew the work by muscle now. My heart kept time with the plan. Grace watched from near the doorway, her face steady, though I could see the tremor beneath. She did not need to know the plan. She needed to trust me, and she did. When she slipped her hand into mine, her fingers were small and warm. That squeeze was our agreement. Keep your face calm. Do your job. Be brave. The feel of her palm was a prayer I could understand. The procession wound down to the river. Master Whitfield and his guests stood in the shallows, the slaves arrayed behind them. Reverend Matthews read scripture in his steady voice, and Father Sullivan moved among the people with a smile practiced to look like mercy. He came toward the shed at the time I had counted and expected. A priest is set in his habits. He believes his patterns keep him safe. He did not think a laundress could become a danger. "Dina," he called as he reached the doorway, pleasant and untroubled. "You prepared a place for me." He stepped into the shadow just inside, the smell of his cassock soft and oily with incense. I felt nothing but the slow steadiness I had cultivated. "Yes, Father," I answered, the tone I used when I wanted no trouble. I had arranged the tub, hung the baptismal robe on its peg, and tucked the jug beneath a pile of linens where it looked like ordinary washing. He began to change, folding his cassock as if preparing for sacraments. He rinsed his hands in the tub and reached for the white robe. "Would you like holy water to bless yourself?" I asked, simple and plain. He nodded, pleased, leaning over the basin as if blessing the world were a habit that came easy. He did not see my hand slip to the jug beneath the cloth. He did not feel the touch because he trusted holiness like armor. When he reached for the robe, I moved. My hands closed around his neck with the force of years of wringing and lifting, my thumb pressing where bone and tendon gave me purchase. He thrashed, surprised and raw with panic. His hands slapped my forearms. For a breath, the room filled with the harsh music of scuffling and the slap of water. He begged, his voice thin and high. "Please, God will forgive me. I can repent." He begged like any sinner surprised to find the law catching up. I had thought about asking. I had thought about bringing the blue scrap to Master Whitfield, laying out the tears in the seams and the stains beneath the incense. I knew what would happen. A priest's word would outweigh mine. A white man's excuse would be a shield. There is no justice in that bar. I had the evidence and the proof, but no paper or judge would listen. The only place left for retribution was my own hands. I forced him forward until his mouth broke the water. The surface closed around his head with a wet sound, the breath leaving with a small, surprised noise. He clawed, fingers scrabbling at the wood and my sleeves. I felt his panic like cold on my wrists. I kept him there. I put my palm against the back of his skull and held until the thrashing slowed and then stopped. The water drank him of breath and left him pale and still. When the last motion ceased, I eased my grip and watched his chest stop moving. There was no triumphant shout, no holy chorus. There was only a deep lake-like stillness that settled over me, the sort of calm that follows a long rain. I dragged his body to the stone floor as if moving heavy sheets, working with the same practiced motions I had used for 26 years. I set him as if he had slipped, arranged his robe, and scattered water on the stones so the puddle read like accident for anyone who wanted a simple story. Outside, a shout rose. The congregation came running, faces flaring with alarm. Master Whitfield's expression fell into that public grief white men wear when a thing they value is broken. "What happened?" they cried. No one looked at me twice. "Who suspects a laundress?" The men clustered and gasped, and then, as they always did, wrapped themselves in the language of misfortune. "He slipped," someone said. A terrible accident. They propped the story and mourned the man they loved, praising his devotion while they cried. I stood with water on my sleeves and felt the sunlight warm the drops into steam. Grace put her hand in mine again, and we watched them tell their own tale. The Reverend said words to hold order. The mistress dabbed her eyes with linen she would later stitch. The slaves made low sounds and bowed their heads because that is what was expected. None of them knew the truth. No one would. After they carried him away and wrapped him for the slow funeral, I cleaned the shed as if washing could erase what had been done. I scrubbed the prints and rinsed the tub until the water ran clear, but the memory sat like a stain under skin. I folded the towels, hung the robes, and moved through the motions of ordinary work. Life on the plantation slid back toward its old rhythm, but the girls I knew moved freer, as if some shadow had been lifted. That night I sat by the embers and pressed the blue scrap against my palm. The fear that had lived in my chest loosened its grip. I had not proved anything to the world. I had only stopped one man from taking more life and more innocence. Mercy's laugh returned like a bell in my memory. Sarah's bright face rose again. Grace's hand in mine felt lighter. There are things a mother will do that the law will never forgive, and perhaps God will ask an account for them when he chooses. I will answer when the day comes. They told the story of his death as accident and tragedy. They built their words into monuments and called him blessed. I let them. The truth lived under my floor and in the river that now held his body. That was enough. The washing went on. The shed kept its rhythms. Some justice is secret and necessary, thought. The body lay in the laundry shed for only a short while before the shouts began. I had already drawn back from him, my apron soaked through, my breath steady but hard-earned. When the first overseer burst in, I was bent over a bucket, wringing a towel. He fell, I said, before he even asked. The words came out calm, automatic, like I'd practiced them in my sleep. He slipped on the wet stones, hit his head before I could reach him. The man's eyes darted from me to the body sprawled beside the tub. He cursed under his breath and ran for Master Whitfield. Minutes later, the whole plantation seemed to crowd at the doorway. The white men shouted, the women wailed, the slaves gathered behind them, whispering. I kept my hands still, my face blank. The mistress pushed through first. Her gloved hand pressed to her mouth. "Dear Lord," she gasped, kneeling beside him. "He's gone." Master Whitfield knelt too, fingers at the father's neck, searching for a pulse that was long vanished. "He must have slipped," he said, his voice grave but controlled. "A tragedy. The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away." He looked around then, his eyes landing on me. "You were here, Dena?" "Yes, sir," I answered, keeping my gaze low. "He came to change for the baptism. The floor was wet from the wash." I gestured toward the puddle, the tub, the cloths I'd arranged for that very purpose. I turned for a towel, and when I looked back, he was already down. It was the easiest lie I'd ever told because it sounded like something the world already believed. A clumsy servant, a slippery floor, an unfortunate accident. The mistress wept, clutching the father's limp hand as if grief alone might pull him back. "Such a good man," she cried. "Such a terrible loss. No one questioned me. Why would they? A slave's word only mattered when it matched their expectations, and nothing in that shed suggested violence. No bruises visible, no signs of struggle beyond what could be explained by the fall. I had washed away everything that might have betrayed the truth. Water had once again done its work. They carried him to the big house, wrapped in linen, his face pale and still. The baptism ceremony was cancelled, of course. The guests murmured about fate, about God's mysterious ways. Some said it was a sign that heaven had called his servant home on the holiest of mornings. I stood outside the shed, my hands still damp, watching them carry him away. Grace found me there. Her eyes asked the question she dared not speak. I only nodded once. She understood. That night the plantation was quiet in a way I had never heard before. Even the crickets seemed to hush. Grace and I sat on the steps of our cabin, the moonlight soft on her face. "Is it over?" she whispered. I took her hand. "It's over, baby. He won't come back." She looked at me for a long moment, then leaned her head against my shoulder. I felt her body finally relax, the tension that had lived in her for weeks melting away. For the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. The next day brought more visitors, planters from neighboring estates, their wives dressed in mourning black. They spoke in hushed voices, all repeating the same words. Tragic, devoted, a true man of God. They praised his sermons, his kindness, his supposed purity. I listened from a distance, pressing sheets and folding clothes for the funeral. Each word of praise struck me like a hammer, but I kept my head down. Let them worship the memory. The man himself was gone, and that was all that mattered. The funeral came 3 days later. The chapel was packed, its walls heavy with incense and hypocrisy. I stood in the back with the other slaves, my eyes on the floor, pretending to mourn. The priest sent from town to conduct the service spoke at length about Father Sullivan's unwavering faith and devotion to the flock entrusted to his care. He called the father a martyr to his calling, a man who died in service to the Lord. The words rolled over me like smoke, empty, choking, false. I kept my face still, but inside, I laughed without sound. A martyr, they called him, a shepherd of souls. They would never know what kind of wolves he hid beneath his robe. The world loved men like him because he looked the part. His silver hair, his gentle tone, those things were his armor. No one wanted to see the blood on it. I had seen it. I had washed it. When the coffin was lowered into the ground, the mistress fainted, and Master Whitfield dabbed his eyes for show. The slaves sang softly, their voices sweet and mournful, carrying through the Georgia air. I let my own lips move with the words, not for him, but for the girls he had broken, Sarah, Mercy, Grace, and all the others who would never again fear his shadow. In the days that followed, a strange calm settled over the plantation. The air itself felt lighter, as if some sickness had been lifted. The girls walked with straighter backs. Their laughter returned, cautious at first, then brighter. Grace began to hum again while she worked, the sound like sunlight through leaves. For years, she had carried the quiet of fear. Now she carried music. I watched her from the shed, pride and sorrow tangled together in my chest. Of course, there were still whispers. People from the neighboring plantations wondered how such a holy man could have died so suddenly. Some said he had been ill. Others claimed the devil had tempted him. None of them looked to me. To them, I was invisible, the washer of sins, the keeper of silence, and that invisibility, once my curse, had become my shield. One evening, old Samuel came to me as I was scrubbing a work shirt. "Strange how the Lord works," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "That priest gone just like that, right before baptizing all them young ones. He studied me, his eyes knowing more than he said. Reckon someone was watching over them girls." I met his gaze for a moment, then looked back at my work. "Sometimes the Lord works through quiet hands," I murmured. He nodded, slow and solemn. "Amen to that," he said, and walked away. That night, I took out the blue cloth from its hiding place beneath the floorboard. I held it to my chest and whispered the names of the girls it represented. The fabric was worn now, soft with handling, but it still carried the weight of everything that had happened. I thought of Father Sullivan's face as the water closed over him, the panic, the disbelief, the final stillness. I wondered if, in that last moment, he saw what I saw all along, that no robe, no sermon, no blessing could hide the rot beneath. I did not feel guilt, only release. The world would go on praising him, remembering him as a saint, but I would remember the truth. And sometimes that is enough. Truth does not need witnesses. It only needs to live somewhere. It lived in me, in the shed, in the river that had carried his sins away. By the time the first spring storms came, his name had begun to fade from daily talk. The new preacher who visited once a month was kind enough. He spoke of hope and mercy, not obedience and fear. The girls went to his sermons without trembling. Grace sang louder now, and I, Dena the laundress, the reader of stains, finally slept through the night. Time has a strange way of smoothing even the roughest memories, though it never truly erases them. In the months after Father Sullivan's death, the Whitfield Plantation found its rhythm again, as though nothing of consequence had happened. Cotton sprouted white and thick. Overseers barked orders, and the mistress filled her days writing letters of pious mourning to the church in Savannah. But under the surface, something had changed. The girls walked freer. Their laughter, once hushed, now floated over the fields again. The shadow that used to fall across every whispered prayer had lifted, and though the white folks spoke of tragedy, the enslaved spoke of deliverance. They said the plantation had been cleansed, that the devil disguised as a priest had been taken by the same holy water he used to hide his sins. No one ever questioned the story of his accident. The doctor from town said it was a blow to the head, perhaps from slipping on the stone edge of the tub. A tragic mishap, he declared. The newspaper printed a short obituary, "A beloved servant of the Lord, gone too soon." They buried him near the chapel under a marble cross the mistress ordered from Savannah. I walked past it often, carrying baskets of linen, and every time I did, I whispered a quiet word, not of mourning but of warning. Let this ground keep its silence. Grace bloomed. In the quiet that followed, the fear that had once hollowed her eyes began to fade. She took to reading the scraps of newspaper I smuggled to her from the big house, tracing the letters with her finger as I whispered the sounds. At night, by candlelight, she learned to write her name on a small slate I traded for with extra washing. Grace Whitfield, she wrote the first time, because she thought she had to. When I corrected her, "Your name's just Grace, baby," she smiled shyly and wrote it again, this time stronger, cleaner. The other women noticed the change too. Sarah's replacement, a girl named Lily, laughed easily, her joy filling the air like birdsong. The fear that used to cloud the chapel was gone. The new preacher, Reverend Matthews, was an old man with kind eyes and trembling hands. His sermons were about endurance, hope, and God's memory of the oppressed. "The Lord sees your suffering," he said one Sunday, "and he will not forget it." I sat at the back and thought, he already remembered once. Weeks turned to months, and I found myself becoming something I had never intended, a voice the others trusted. When quarrels arose in the quarters, people came to me to settle them. When a girl felt uneasy about a man's gaze, her mother sent her to me for advice. I never spoke of what I had done, but they seemed to sense it. There was a respect in their eyes, quiet but certain. Old Samuel called me Miss Dina now, though such titles were never meant for slaves. "You got a power about you," he told me once. "Something changed after that Easter. Like you done scared the devil himself." I smiled at that. "Maybe I just washed him out," I said. In the evenings, when the day's heat had settled into a soft, tired dusk, I would sit outside the shed and watch the horizon. The river glimmered faintly in the distance, the same river that had carried the Easter crowd's hymns and the secret of what happened in my laundry. I sometimes wondered if the holy water I poured into that tub had found its way back to the river's heart, blending with the current until the truth became part of its flow. Maybe that's what justice really is, not a shout, not a gavel, but a slow-moving current that carries what must be carried until it reaches the sea. By the time 1861 arrived, war clouds gathered over the South. Men shouted about rights and property, never meaning us when they said men. Master Whitfield left to join the Confederate Army, leaving the plantation to his wife and a few overseers too old to fight. The world around us began to crack, and through those cracks, light started to leak in. Slaves ran away in the night, some joining the Union lines, some disappearing into the swamps. For the first time, the word freedom didn't sound like a fairy tale. It sounded possible. Grace was 17 then, her body grown into womanhood, her mind sharp as a needle. She helped me in the shed, and together we kept the place running even as the war starved the plantation of supplies. She spoke of schools up north where colored girls could learn to teach. One day she said, "I'll teach little ones to read the way you taught me." I smiled, pride swelling in my chest like a hymn. "You will," I said. "You'll teach them letters, and I'll teach them to listen to what cloth says." She laughed softly, not knowing that beneath the joke was a truth every woman needs to know: how to read the signs the world hides from her. When Sherman's army marched through Georgia in 1864, burning and freeing as they went, we were ready. I had hidden a small stash of coins, saved from years of quiet trades. Grace and I packed what little we owned: a Bible without a cover, the slate, the blue scrap of cloth, and one jug filled with water from the river. We left before dawn, walking north toward freedom. The sound of the plantation fading behind us was like the end of a song I had been forced to sing for too long. Philadelphia took us in months later. The city was noisy, cold, and strange, but it smelled like possibility. Grace found work teaching in the freedmen's schools, her hands chalk-dusted and sure. I took in washing again because old habits die slow, but this time the water felt different. I washed for pay, not obedience. Each garment I cleaned felt like a page turned in a new book. Years passed. Grace married, had children, and filled her home with laughter. She named her first daughter Mercy, though the child would never know the story behind that name. I grew old quietly, my hands still strong but slower now. The scars from lie had softened, but they would never fade. Sometimes, when I washed my own clothes, I'd catch a glimpse of the past in the steam, the chapel, the tub, the water closing over his face. I would whisper, "Be still," and the memory would calm. When Grace's eldest boy asked me once, "Grandma, is it true you were a slave?" I told him yes. He looked puzzled. "But you don't look like someone who belonged to anyone." I smiled. "That's because I didn't. Not really. I just let them think so." By the time I reached 83, the world had changed beyond what I dared hope. Slavery was gone, though its ghosts lingered in the corners. Grace's students grew into teachers themselves, carrying her lessons forward. And me, I lived long enough to see my granddaughter hold a book without fear. That was victory enough. On quiet nights when the lamp burned low, Grace would sit beside me and ask about that Easter morning. She'd never pressed before, but now her voice was gentle. "Do you think God forgave you, Mama?" I thought a long while before answering. "I think God understands what it means to protect what he loves," I said. "If it was sin, it was a sin born of love. And love, real love, can make even sin holy." She nodded, tears in her eyes, and took my hand. When I finally died in 1889, I went easy. My children and grandchildren surrounded me, their faces lit by candlelight. They sang softly as I slipped away, their voices like warm water washing me clean one last time. They would never know the full story of the laundress who drowned a priest in holy water, but the spirit of that act lived in them, the courage to face evil, the will to protect, the understanding that justice sometimes wears plain clothes and carries a washboard instead of a weapon. And so my name faded into whispers, passed from mother to daughter, a quiet legend told in kitchens and schoolhouses. Dina, the woman who washed away sin and never looked back. Maybe that's all the legacy I need. I didn't change the world, but I changed the world of those I loved, and sometimes that's enough to make even God smile.